Hello and welcome to Michael's Minty Music for today. Today we review Arcadia's only album, 1985's So Red the Rose. Arcadia is a Duran Duran spin-off band. This album is good but not outstanding. This is the track listing, and these are the tracks added to my playlist. 5 out of 9, so 1 over half here. This album is good, but most of the songs here are pretty much the same. None of them are outstanding. There isn't really any more upbeat tracks here. Most of them kind of tend towards the mid to low speed range. So the album doesn't have a lot of flow or variety. There are a few more interesting tracks, but they aren't very good. It's kind of, the album is full of a bunch of tracks that sound the same but are all good, and a few tracks that sound different but definitely aren't as good as the others. The opening couple of tracks do pretty well for starting off the album, and in general there isn't any particular section here that's really bad. It's pretty well balanced, but there are no songs here that really hype up the album aside from maybe the first track. Most of the tracks at the end of the album are pretty good, but they're also unnecessarily long. They could have easily cut them down to 4 or 5 minutes with a little trouble, and I think the album would be a bit better for it. Still, the ending is good, the beginning is good, and in between is fine. So in general, this is a pretty good album. Definitely would have preferred better, but I can't complain. There was one single release before the album, the opening track Election Day, which is definitely one of the better tracks here, and apparently was relatively popular at the time, although I had never heard of it, so it didn't really have a lot of staying power. My favorite track here is The Promise, track number 7, although it was really close between that one and Election Day. They're the best versions of the primary sound that most of the tracks here have, so those two are kind of outstanding. Goodbye is Forever is also good. As the first and only Arcadia album that exists, it has the only spot in the relatively pointless rankings, but as I mentioned, Arcadia was a Duran Duran spin-off band with all 3 members being part of Duran Duran, so it's a little interesting to compare to those albums. I think this is where I'd rank it, right under Notorious, which came out a year after this one. It's definitely better than Big Thing or anything under that, and I think it's probably better than Danse Macabre. It's basically on the same level as Astronaut and Future Past, which is pretty good, but I think I like Arcadia's style a bit better. It's more new wavy 80s than the 2004 or 2021 albums. So I would probably put it in the upper part of that sort of section of good albums. However, this album doesn't take my top spot from 1985. That stays with Talking Heads' 1985 album Little Creatures, which is definitely better, although I will admit not by a ton, but clearly the higher quality album than So Red the Rose. And So Red the Rose is not my favorite, and I don't think it would take the spot here even if it was more of a high quality. Next up is the Beatles' 1964 album, A Hard Day's Night. It's pretty good, although a bit repetitive. Not their best work, but it has still aged all right. This is kind of their early 60s work, so, it's very placed in the time period. But stay tuned for that, and as always, stay minty.